She's the first and so far the only woman president of Rotary Club of New York in 107 years. And she's also the representative of Rotary International at the United Nations. On her left, Marcela Bonifa, our very own from Rotary Club of New York. She has arranged today's speaker. Thank you very much, Marcela. And on her left, Frank Devlyn, past president of Rotary International. He is also elected as the Entrepreneur of the Year in Mexico. Congratulations, Frank. We have other ambassadors in the room, and I had a pleasure of meeting some of them before the meeting had started. If I'm forgetting anybody, I apologize. I greet and salute all of you. To be specific, Catalina Chalks is here. She's a former vice consul from Colombia in Toronto. We have the ambassador of Andorra, Elisin Vasquez. And Mr. Carlos Lim sends his regards. He couldn't make it today, but he says send his regards. He's a friend of Rotary. He's a friend of ours. We appreciate it. Thank you very much, sir. And I would also like to make a quick point. We have started a project in Sierra Leone focusing on the adolescent girls' education needs. With the help of Mediators Beyond Borders, Sierra Leone has been Ebola-free for 4 years now. And congratulations and thank you for the God's work you have been doing. I would like to make one last point. Now, I'm a Turkish American. Council is a Turkish American. And yesterday, we have arranged a phone conversation for the first time between the President-elect Donald Trump and the existing President of Turkey, Mr. Erdogan. Now, as Rotarians, we don't have borders. We don't take sides. We cut it from the middle and we collaborate. We work as the bridge between nations, between cultures, between people, and between Rotarians. I'm honored and happy to tell you, we're not only the host of America, as Paul Harris has said in 1926, we have become the host club of the world's affairs now. I'm going to ask Marcela to introduce our guest speaker. I won't take too much of your time. Thank you very much and welcome again.
Thank you, Can. All right, I have the great pleasure as an Argentinian to read the ambassador Juan José Gómez-Camacho today. He has a long-standing bio, but let me summarize it. He is the permanent representative to the Mexico at the UN, and he holds a degree from the Universidad Iberoamericana in Mexico and a master's degree in international law from Georgetown University in Washington. He is a career diplomat. So Mr. Gómez-Camacho joined the Mexican Foreign Service in 1988. Since then, he has held different positions, both within the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and overseas. In December 2013, he was appointed Ambassador of Mexico to the European Union, as well as of the mission to the United Kingdom in Belgium, and Grand Duchy of Luxembourg. From August 2009 until December 2013, he was appointed permanent representative in Mexico to the United Nations and other international organizations in Geneva, Switzerland. In addition, from January 2006 and August 2009, he served as an ambassador of Mexico to the Republic of Singapore, concurrent with the Union of Myanmar and the Sultanate of Brunei Darussalam. At the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, among other positions, he worked as Director of Human Rights and Democracy in December 2000 until December 2005. From 1997 to 2000, he served as Deputy Permanent Resident of Mexico to the Organization of American States. Ambassador Gómez-Camacho bears broad experience as a Mexican negotiator, both in bilateral and multilateral fields. He's very involved in human rights, telecommunication, nuclear and conventional disarmament, amongst others. He has been promoting business and investment in different sectors in Mexico, and he has written and co-authored a considerable amount of articles of general subjects ranging from international law and human rights to Mexico's foreign relations and policies. As you can see, we're more than welcome to have Ambassador Gómez-Camacho here. It will be a pleasure.
Thank you so much. Good morning. Thank you so much for inviting me. I was saying to the president that my father was a Rotary many years ago, and I grew up very close to Rotary International in Mexico City. So when I received the invitation, I was not only immediately willing to come, but in fact it brought back many very beautiful memories of my childhood. So it's really an honor to be here. It is also an honor to see Frank Devlyn here. He, as you heard, is being appointed Entrepreneur of the Year, but I have to say that he is one of the most distinguished Mexican businessmen and a true member, if you like, of this stirp of Mexican businessmen that have contributed to the country enormously. And I think he has done that not only to Rotary, but many other fields. So it's really good to see you here. Let me share with you three reflections on the UN and indeed of Mexico. First, let me put some context of what kind of country we are talking about, so you can understand why and how we do what we do in the United Nations. And then I will focus on two key issues in my view of the current UN, but also I think very relevant for a group like this one, which is Rotary. I should start by saying, and I think to me this is the most fundamental reflection and the most fundamental part for everybody to understand, as private individuals. Because very often the UN is seen as this abstract institution where governments do abstract politics or policies dealing with huge, global, and again very often abstract challenges. Abstract in the sense that they look so far from ordinary, common, private individuals. But the truth of the matter is that that has been changing over the last few years in a very dramatic way. And why? Well, it has been changing in a very dramatic way for the simple reason that issues, challenges, solutions to those challenges and opportunities that not so long ago we always understood as purely national, where the solutions were national, where we could or we were used to deal with them nationally, are not anymore national. And this is not simply because we or someone decided to make them international, but simply because this is the natural result of the interdependence that we all have been creating and developing. In other words, the challenges that we have as Mexicans, the challenges that you have as Americans or the countries you come from, can't be solved anymore only by your countries or my country. Now, it happens that we have to work together. And second is that these challenges, these issues, these subjects are those that affect the ordinary daily life of people. So the UN is not anymore this huge institution dealing with the abstract, gross, big, global issues from peace and security, but it is also an institution that is dealing with the challenges of ordinary people, and I will explain why. Now, before I go there, let me put a little bit of context on Mexico itself, because that helps understanding, again, why we do what we do there, and how we see and how we understand the role of our country globally. Mexico is today a very big country. It's a country of close to 130 million people, and is, from whatever angle you want to see it, an emerging nation. Almost under any measurement you want to use, Mexico is always around one of the 10 largest countries in the world. And this is not only population, or this is not only territory, this is also economics. It's also exports, it's also imports. Frank can testify of this much better than me. Mexico has today a total trade of $800 billion a year. We are the 9th largest exporter of goods in the world. We are one of the largest manufacturer producers in the world. Mexican manufacturing goods, for example, and our exports of manufacturing goods account for more or less 70% of the totality of the manufacturing exports of Latin America put together. If you see Mexico in terms of tourism, in terms of investment, in terms of whatever you want to see, the figures are always more or less the same. This means that Mexico has been very fast becoming increasingly globally systemic. This means, in other words, less and less and less global conversations can take place to address global challenges without Mexico sat around the table. So Mexico is not anymore only a big Latin American country, but is increasingly becoming a large emerging global country, or emerging country with global presence. Now, the way we interpret these new characteristics, if you like, is by understanding what I was saying before, first and foremost, that neither Mexico nor any other country in the world can build prosperity for itself if we don't help build prosperity for the others. And this is not only because this is the right thing to do. Fair enough, it is, absolutely, and that's the core, of course. It has, of course, an ethical element, yes, absolutely. But beyond that, it's a true reality. The times of zero-sum games that we saw in the past, in the global arena, are gone. Where my interests worked versus your interests. And it worked. It proved successful, if you like, for many, many years and decades. Today, that simply doesn't work. Because your own prosperity, because your own future is completely linked to that of the rest. And that's what is changing dramatically the United Nations and the mentality of all of us, at least of Mexico. So Mexico is approaching this global size that now has, this global reach that now we have, with a profound sense of responsibility. And President Peña Nieto did something remarkable at the beginning of his administration. When he devised, he explained to the Mexicans his vision for the country, he put in the center of such a vision the notion of Mexico's global responsibility. In other words, the need for Mexico to understand that with size, this big size that Mexico has, a deep sense of duty, of global duty, comes there. Again, because our prosperity is linked to the prosperity of the others. And others' prosperity, because of the size of Mexico, is very much linked to that of Mexico itself. So we are, let's come to the specifics in the UN today with these two things in mind. What is happening in international order and why this Mexico and how approaches things in this new international order. As I was saying, the UN used to deal with these broad peace and security issues. Not anymore. Not only that. So one of the first things I want to share with you on the UN's happenings that in fact are very linked to you as private sector individuals is prosperity itself, is growth, is well-being, is development. So a year and a half ago, the UN adopted something you have heard many times already, most likely, which is the so-called 2030 Agenda, sustaining development goals. What is that? In the UN, we have always understood that development, quote unquote, should be part of its work. Except that it was always seen as the challenge of the poor, the less advanced countries or the disadvantaged countries. And it was, if any, the responsibility of the rich and the wealthy to help them overcome that. What is different today with this 2030 agenda? Well, the difference today, the first one is that we have understood not only that development is there, but that is not anymore only a challenge for the poor, it's not only a challenge of the South, it's not only a challenge of developing countries, but it's a challenge also of wealthier, richer nations. Because inequality is not only a phenomenon of the poorer countries, poverty itself is not only a phenomenon of the poorer countries. These phenomena we are seeing them everywhere in the world, whether we are poorer, less developed, more developed, or fully developed countries. Developed nations are also facing these challenges. So what the Agenda 2030 does is that puts in the center of the work of the UN, in the core of the work, in the core of the mission of the organization and its 193 member states, development, which in other words means prosperity for all. In other words means well-being. And why is there in the core of the UN, in the center of the UN? Because of what I was saying. Not only because it's the right thing to do, not only because you can argue it's ethical, yes, ethics count. The right values count. But also, and probably more than that, because we all have understood then that the only way we can address our own prosperity challenges, we can improve the quality of life of our peoples, needs working together, globally, all countries together pursuing the same objectives. That's the real core of this. Now, for this 2030 agenda to be fulfilled, and this is where you come into the picture, this is not only the UN designing and working around these issues. It's not only our governments committing to it and pushing for it, but it is also the civil society and it is also the private sector. Those that can work together with governments, with all sectors of within countries to prosper, to implement these 17 goals of sustainable development. And one of the biggest and most fascinating challenges that we have around this agenda today is that, unlike in the past again, where we can lock for hours inside a room in the UN, solving everything, or thinking we are solving everything, is that now we need to come out of those walls and to talk to people like you everywhere in the world, to engage you in this global agenda, to help us work together in creating, in promoting this prosperity and this development. And something that we are understanding slowly in the UN, but we are. And I think the private sector is also understanding slowly what you are, is that companies, business people like yourselves, not only need to embrace, as you have done since many years, notions of corporate social responsibility, etc., fair enough, that's very good. But more than that, that business need to start becoming themselves sustainable too. And that business require healthy, strong, robust societies for you to thrive, not only for you to do the right thing, again, that's implicit, but more importantly, for you to thrive in business. And that is also the 2030 agenda. Second UN big picture, if I can put it this way, issue that comes from this one I am describing to you. The United Nations was created, came to life from the ashes of the worst, most devastating war and human tragedy the world has ever seen. And it succeeded in recreating the conditions for countries to live together and to a certain big degree, to solve their differences through peaceful means. And that's something we have always given to the UN and to member states. And the UN has also been successful in intervening in conflicts around the world, bringing peace or solutions to these conflicts. But we have also failed in something very fundamental, which is two things. One is that when the UN, through peacekeeping, blue helmets, etc., manages to bring peace after conflict, we have not been able, as UN, to help these places or these countries to build the necessary conditions for peace to become self-sustaining and not staying alive through life support, let alone the other challenge that we have fallen short, preventing conflict in the first place. So we have been working in another paradigmatic shift in the organization, which is something we are calling sustaining peace, which is totally linked to the 2030 agenda I was describing to you before. It means that peace has to be understood as a continuum, and it means, above all, that for countries to live in peace, for countries not, and for societies not to face conflict, development is required. Prosperity is required. How can you expect not to have conflict in X country, somewhere in the world, where unemployment is 80%, where there is no food security, where there is no water sanitation, where there are no institutions? Of course there will be conflict. Can we fix that by peacekeeping, blue helmets, soldiers, etc.? No. We can only address those challenges by bringing development. So the core root causes of conflict are truly addressed. So when I was telling you about this 2030 agenda, it is also this. This is not only the 2030 agenda, the broadest, the most real way to improve the quality of life of people around the world, which again is now a core mandate of the United Nations. But it is also the real only way to prevent conflict and to address conflict. In other words, to build peace. I don't know how much time, and when I start talking, I keep talking. So, so I will maybe, we can go for questions. All right. So I will conclude, and we can, and I'm very, very happy to take questions. In this picture, I come back to Mexico again. In all these tracks I am describing to you, Mexico plays a very, very fundamental role. First, because of what I explained. Mexico is already too big. Mexico has become globally systemic. For many of these things to happen, Mexico needs to be around the table, as other countries. but Mexico needs to be around the table. Again, because Mexico is an emerging country with increasingly global reach. But second, because we have another very specific characteristic, if you like, that gives us some very specific capacity, which is the fact that Mexico has today 1 foot on the developing world, 1 foot on the developed world, because the country has advanced a lot. So, yes, Mexico is happily, proudly, culturally, an identity is very Latin American. That's what we are. But Mexico is equally, proudly, happily, and also because of its identity, a North American country. So the same way we belong to Latin America, the same way we belong to North America. And if you see the numbers, the figures of North America, or the North American integration, you would be astounded, astonished. Mexico-US trade today, give you just an idea, bilateral trade is 600 billion a year. We export to the US $1 billion per day. And we import from the US, or we buy from the US, more than China, Japan, and half of the European Union combined. It's truly massive. And the same, and by the way, we have reached a point of economic integration where it's not anymore only a question of buying and selling, importing or exporting to each other. But more than that, today we are in joint production, which means that together with the integration, as a result of the integration, value chains of many industries are completely integrated between the two countries and sometimes between the three countries. Mexico is the 4th largest exporter of cars in the world, for example, and the 6th largest producer. If you take a car that leaves a Mexican factory, or a car that leaves an American factory, these cars cross the border before being ready an average of 6 times during the production chain. So we are this North American country as well. So coming back to the UN, in this polarized world, where dialogue between regions, where dialogue between countries, where dialogue between cultures is challenging, Mexico plays also another, I can't say fundamental role, because we are both, because we are North, because we are South, because we are a developing country that also has a part of the developed world, because we are an emerging nation, very large, with increasing capacities where we can reach even more globally, but with an acute capacity to be in the shoes almost of every country because of our own experience. because where we are geographically, and because where we are in a level of flow, development, and prosperity. I think I will stop here, and I'm very happy to take questions. Thank you so much for listening. No, I can take them here. I'm sorry that we are going to do something weird, which is I can't read because I can't see enough to read the paper, so the person is going to read them.
Sure. What progress, if any, has been made by the central government in dealing with the corruption that helps to enable drug cartels?
You have to understand that, as they say, geography is destiny, and geography marks the reality of all countries. We have, as Mexico has always recognized, an important challenge with drug cartels and organized crime, because Mexico is in the middle of, has been in the middle of, that's reality, of drugs coming from the south to the north. So producers somewhere in the south and consumers in the north of Mexico. So the challenges to address that are enormous. So in terms of that, not only we have been strengthening our institutions, strengthening our justice institutions, strengthening our law enforcement capacity, strengthening education, giving more opportunities, employment. We have very low unemployment rate, below 4%. So younger people have education, and then they can have employment, decent employment. And in fact, by the way, that's why we are, that's another consequence of this. We are having experiencing over the last 4 years reverse migration to Mexico. So that is one side, on the law enforcement, education to reduce drug trafficking, violence, etc., etc. We need to work with our neighbors. There's no way when you have transnational organized crime that any country can solve it on its own. We need to work together. On corruption, the Congress, President Peña Nieto, has been putting forward sweeping laws to construct a very strong institutional infrastructure or architecture institutions to address corruption. Corruption is a cancer everywhere, is unacceptable, and we are really doing our part internally to address it. It's a complex issue. Both the federal government as well as the Congress are working on this. New legislation, the new system, you can check it if you're interested on that online. The new anti-corruption system just approved by the Mexican Congress has been praised and recognized globally as a very, very strong, very important one.
According to the Agustin Cartens, I apologize for torturing his name. Mexico's central bank chief Trump.
Microphone's on you, but
There you go. That's all that matters. According to Agustin Cartens, Carstens, Mexico's central bank chief said that Trump will be a, in quote, hurricane for Mexico, and the government's working on emergency plan B on economics. What is Mexico's plan B on the economics?
Well, I thought you were going to ask me about the UN. Okay. Yesterday morning, both the governor of the central bank, Agustin Carstens, as well as our Minister of Finance, Dr. José Antonio Meade, gave a press conference.
Speak up.
Gave a press conference explaining the strength of the fundamentals of the Mexican economy. The Mexican economy is a very robust economy. The economy is growing, the financial system is very robust. Again, the macroeconomics of the country are very strong, and they both explain. If you want to go for more detail, please just check there. They just gave this, again, press conference explaining with all detail how we see this new phase.
Thank you. Go ahead. Please.
What are the plans of Mexico to eliminate the use of fossil fuels to address climate change?
President Peña Nieto, one of the most remarkable things of this administration is what we have called the structural reforms of Mexico. So as soon as he came to office 4 years ago, he put together with opposition parties in Congress what it was called at the time El Pacto por México. El Pacto por México, el Pact for Mexico, was a very extensive political agreement amongst all political parties in Congress and government to fundamentally change Mexico for the future, with a very clear vision of where we want to be in 20, 30, 40 years. That required, and they all agreed, on a package of 11 structural reforms. These, let me just quote the most important ones. Education reform, fiscal reform, telecommunications reform that opened up the market, and energy reform. Energy, as you know, the energy sector, oil and gas, was a state monopoly. After the reform, the constitutional reform, the sector was open for private participation, investment, and above all, competition, both in the oil gas sector as well as in the electricity sector. Now, in this package of laws, there is a very important, how can I say it? It's an approach, if you like, not only specific laws and rules, but truly an approach of environmental protection, reduction of fossil fuels, and Mexico entering fully into the renewable energy. There are 2 or 3 sectors on the renewables where Mexico is very big already, and it has geographic and natural extraordinarily big capacities. Solar, Mexico belongs to the so-called solar belt. Aeolic, wind energy, and I forgot the term, the one that you take from underground. Geothermal. Thank you. I'm too much on other things in the geothermal. And you are seeing enormous investments coming to the country, working particularly on those 3. But if you are interested on that from the business perspective or from your concerns on environment, climate, etc., please look into that. Internationally, Mexico was one of the very visible actor, negotiator, promoter of the climate change negotiations. We hosted Cancun, which was a COP16, to keep pushing the process, and Mexico 2 weeks ago ratified the Paris Agreement.
Sure. Mr. Ambassador, assuming Mexico welcomes foreign investors, what assurances do foreign investors have to mitigate the fear of local criminal or governmental corruption that will threaten the investments?
You can see what is happening in the country in many fields, and you have to understand the whole country, how it is moving. And just to be very, very clear, if you get into this the text, the laws, the changes that we are putting forward, that the administration has been putting forward, you will see what is truly happening in terms of our efforts and the size and commitment of Mexico's efforts to combat corruption and to reduce insecurity. No one is more interested than us in solving our own challenges. It's Mexicans first and foremost, and not only because of political reasons, but because it is our country. And no one, again, is more interested, more committed than the government and Mexicans to work on that. Mexican foreign investment into Mexico is extremely important. And you have to see, when you make an assessment of what is happening in Mexico and the impact and how bad or not bad are certain things, how investment is flowing into the country. There are two areas where you can factually see the situation of Mexico. One is precisely foreign direct investment, and the other is tourism. Foreign direct investment has been consistently growing over the last 4 years in a remarkable way. We should be more or less receiving 35, I'm not updated, but around 35 billion a year. And growing, and growing, and growing. Tourism, it's also another good thermometer of what happens in the country. We went back or came back or returned after some years, 2 years ago, to the first 10 largest tourist destinations in the world. We first returned to number 10, and now we are number 9, and growing. Today, we moved, if I'm not mistaken, at the beginning of this administration, Mexico was receiving a bit more than 20 million a year, tourists a year. Today, we should be around 35. And this growing over the last 4 or 5 years. So again, these two indicators are very, very well telling of what is really happening in the country. But again, foreign direct investment, you will truly hardly find another country more friendly, more open, and more committed to that. We truly believe in that. We have one of the most open economies in the world. We have FTA, foreign free trade agreement with over 50 countries. So the access, the openness, the liberalization of trade that Mexico has been pursuing over the last 20 years is truly remarkable.
This was just sent to us online. So as I visit Mexico as a tourist, I have seen tremendous building and growth, especially in Cancun, where workers may only make $2 to $3 a day. This seems to make more separation between rich and poor. So how can this be addressed? We see here in the stocks only rich and poor getting away from middle class. Do you see this as a problem? And this question comes from Mexico.
Yes, one of the challenges, I think the biggest challenge that Mexico has at the end of the day, as the president and the government not only always mention, but also all our public policy is going to there, is precisely reducing inequality. Inequality, as I was saying when I started my conversation with you, it's one of the biggest global challenges. It's a challenge in every country in the world, and we have a problem of inequality. Mexico has, if you see the country, which is very large, from Mexico City to the north, and all states in between, the per capita income of Mexicans over the last 20 years has grown around 47%, which is enormous. But the southeast part of Mexico, particularly two states, Oaxaca and Guerrero, have not experienced this growth. They have stayed basically with zero in terms of per capita income. So the inequality gap is important. All these structural reforms I mentioned to you, their main goal at the end of the day is precisely to reduce this inequality. Now, more specifically, figures. Mexico has, there is an institution called Coneval, which is a constitutionally independent institution that measures poverty in the country. We have INEGI that does the same. And then you have the World Bank measuring poverty. Poverty, can I take 3 minutes to explain it? And feel free to stop me. Traditionally, at the international level, poverty is being measured by income, and that's it. So, the World Bank or other institutions, national institutions in many parts of the world, they set a baseline of $2, $3 per day, or X amount of dollars. And if people are below that line in terms of income, they are poor. If they are above that line, they are not poor. So when you measure poverty in that way, the end result, in a way, let's say, is far from accurate. If you measure Mexico under those criteria, yes, Mexico shows very little poverty. 4, 5, 6 million, that's all, out of almost 130 million. We have designed a new way to measure poverty. That, by the way, and I go back to my previous statements, is the one we are using in the development goals, in the 2030 agenda. It's a Mexican, I have to say very proudly, a Mexican insemination, what I am going to explain to you, which is that poverty has to be measured in a multidimensional way. It can't be measured only by income. It has to measure the actual real quality of life of people. So we designed, these institutions designed, and these are independent Mexican official institutions, a system with 7 different dimensions. Of course, income is there, but it is also housing, and what kind of housing. It's not only a question of whether someone has a house or not, but what kind of ceiling the house has, whether they have television or not, whether they have what kind of toilet, bathroom, water, sanitation, whether the kids have access to school, to education or not, what's the distance from the house or the place they live to the schools or to the nearest hospital, etc., etc. So we have measured poverty in that sense. That has resulted in around 40 million Mexicans below this poverty line, but again, not by income. If you measure by income, the poverty in Mexico is very, very small. But we ourselves created a very sophisticated, rigorous way to measure the actual quality of life of Mexicans. Now, let's assume that we do have these 40, 50 million people that in these 7 categories have shortcomings, have limitations. If I'm not mistaken, for us to consider someone below the poverty line, it has to be below the baseline, I think, on 2 out of the 7 or 3 out of the 7 dimensions or categories. You see how rigorous this is? Now, so we have, according to this, 40-50. I have to say that this also means, and this is very important, and no one speaks about it, that Mexico therefore has a population of around, let's say, 80 million Mexicans above the poverty line in the full middle income. So yes, Mexico faces challenges of poverty. Mexico faces challenges of inequality. But 80 million more or less Mexicans are already in the middle income. That's a lot. And that's why, by the way, the drivers of the Mexican growth used to be, and Frank can explain this again better than me, by the engine were or was manufacturing exports. We are one of the largest exporters in the world. Mexico became a true manufacturing powerhouse, an exporter powerhouse. But recently, despite the global challenges of the economy, the drivers of the Mexican of the economy, of the growth of the economy, have become domestic consumption. And when it is domestic consumption pushing the growth, something very good is happening. Now, our challenge, our commitment, President Peña Nieto's biggest, most important commitment is precisely to the poor and to reduce these inequalities. I finalize this point by saying that in the case of, in the south of Mexico, where growth is not there, where the biggest poverty remains, where the inequality shows itself in the worst case, he created, and Congress just passed the legislation, and it is already in the process of implementation, 2 very large economic zones, where, this is not new, it's new in Mexico, but it's not new in the world. Many countries have used or resorted to the establishment of economic zones, where the state creates very specific, well-targeted policies, social, economic, and above all, very important incentives for the economy to move there, for companies and investors to come there, for the local people to have more access to training, to education, to preparation so they can join the workforce and start developing their own situation.
Thank you, Ambassador. We are receiving many questions from the floor and online regarding the elections and the mostly political questions. If you care to do so, you could make a general comments.
I would just make a general comment if I may. And then I think I will have to leave, unfortunately, because I'm very happy talking to you. And the other building is waiting for me. The president of Mexico, President Peña Nieto, gave a press conference yesterday, as soon as the results were known, where he welcomed the new administration of the U.S., where he expressed his respect for the democratic process, for the democratic process in the U.S. and for the election. He spoke already to President-elect Trump, and they agreed to start working together. This is a new phase in the bilateral relation. We need each other. If things go well for the U.S., things go well for Mexico. If things go well for Mexico, things go well for the U.S. And that's the way we see it. Thank you very much.
Mr. Ambassador. You can accept honorary membership form. And I'm going to ask President Frank to pin you. And if Frank wants to make a couple of comments, we'll welcome them as well. But first, I'll make a presentation to the honorary membership.
Thank you very much.
Professor. I want to compliment you for your outstanding presentation. I just want to briefly have some remarks I want to mention beforehand. Because I've lived in Mexico, I've lived in the United States, having an American father and a Mexican mother. I've been raised on the border of Ciudad Juarez, Chihuahua, where I'm from, and El Paso, Texas. It gives me a unique opportunity to understand in different perspective as a business person. I am a personal friend of the President Enrique Peña Nieto. He happens to be my neighbor in Ixtapan de la Sal, and I know all the other past presidents personally, and I know business people. And the ambassador is one of the outstanding persons. I know Patricia Espinosa, Jose Antonio Meade, Claudia Rees-Macier, other people he reports to, but he's going to be one of the head guys himself. But I know these things, but there's some things that I just want to bring out as a businessman's perspective. Number one, I have 7 factories. We are mom and pop operation, optical stores. That's why I have some green cards to give out to clean your glasses. If you get them, I'll make sure I give them to you. But we grew from a mom and pop operation to the largest in Latin America, about 1,200 opticals. But we have 7 factories. We used to produce things in Mexico, but then globalization came. NAFTA came. We closed down 7 factories. One factory, for example, is making bifocals. Now we're the largest customer for vision needs out of Minnesota. We had contact lens products. Now we're the largest for Alcon out of. See, you have all of these things happening. But one thing I look at it the businessman perspective. I was just recently in Seoul, and they have 1,300 companies in Mexico. Japan has 1,000. But the United States has taken over, too, as a business perspective. You go to any shopping center, you see it. Walmart has #1 position right now. So I mention all these things. Sometimes we forget about it. We have to live hand in hand. Sometimes people mention about need a comprehensive immigration. Well, when nobody gets a permit, that's why you have the problem you have today. Nobody gets a permit for a temporary worker. Something has to be done. So that's a very simple thing. If nobody gets a permit, you have all the problems you have today. But Ambassador, we congratulate you for having come here. I compliment the New York City Rotary Club for having this concept here of grassroots peacekeeping. It all starts in the grassroots. And this New York City Rotary Club is an example for the world for what they're doing. And I compliment you for coming here, representing Mexico, and giving a perspective like other ambassadors have come here too, and especially have your Rotary background. So, do you think he's a qualified person to be an honorary Rotarian? Yeah. Well, stand up, everybody. Give him a round of applause to the ambassador. Yeah? I'm also going to mention not only for the New York City Rotary, but also for the Rotarians from Mexico. Because ambassadors in Mexico, they're well aware, we make our ambassadors honorary Rotarians. But here you have an outstanding ambassador who's represented Mexico at all levels, in Europe, all over the world, and the person going places. You're seeing a person, it's a wonder that you have him here today with you, but he has an outstanding track record. So, Ambassador Juan José Gómez-Camacho, I want you to raise your right hand. Now, you promise to be a good honorary Rotarian. I promise. Now, when you happen to show up to the Rotary Club of New York, are you in agreement in paying what every visitor has to pay for the meal? Okay, that sounds good. So allow me to, will you hold this for me? I'm going to give you my Rotary pin.
Oh my God.
You're not closing stuff.
Let me see the certificate right now. And the certificate reads, honorary membership that certifies that the Honorable Ambassador Juan José Gómez-Camacho has been granted honorary membership in the Rotary Club of New York, Club number 6. This is the host club for the United Nations. But I'm also doing it for Mexico. They're also an honorary Rotarian there too. So family of Rotarians, welcome the newest Rotarian in the world of Rotary.
Thank you Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you, everybody, for coming.
If anyone needs tickets for Rotary UN Day, please see me now. Come see our exhibits, including solar power.
Kapatayım mı? Record etmeyi bırakıyorum.
Sen de şimdi bence şeyi kesebilirsin.